Time now then for the French newspapers, and Elena's with us here in the set. As we've said, all sorts of different news stories around at the moment. The French newspapers, they only seem to have noticed that there's one, don't they?
Yes, their favourite story is back on the front pages. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, of course, after that interview he gave last night. Let's have a look first at some of the political reactions. Le Nouvel Observateur has been polling the reactions of all sorts of people, from those involved in the case to right-wing and left-wing politicians. They look first at the mother of Tristine Banon, who is, of course, still pursuing Dominique Strauss-Kahn in the courts for alleged attempted rape. Now, she says, as you might expect, that this was a theatrical exercise containing no new information from which we learnt nothing. They also talk to Nafissatou Diallo's French lawyer, who says that DSK held up the New York prosecutor's report on TV to try and use it to defend himself, but they point out he was using it really to say something that it doesn't say. He was holding it up, saying that it clears him, when of course it doesn't. It just says that the New York prosecutor thought that there wasn't enough reason to move the case forward. He didn't think it would stand up in front of a jury, which is not the same as having cleared him. And they also talk in Le Nouvel Observateur to some of his closest socialist allies, including Jack Lang, who says that after last night he's more proud than ever to be Strauss-Kahn's friend, and that he thought the interview was full of wisdom and emotion. Now, Jack Lang, of course, was the politician who caused headlines around the world immediately after Strauss-Kahn's arrest, when he said that it wasn't particularly serious and no one was dead. So in that context, we'll let what he says today stand on its own, if you like. He seems to have watched quite a different interview to the rest of the people quoted in that article. Although it does seem some of the French papers might have seen the same interview as Jack Lang, in fact, particularly Le Figaro here, which their headline says Dominique Strauss-Kahn recognises a moral fault, and inside in their editorial they say that you rarely see a politician admit to having done anything wrong, so we should be congratulating him for giving that interview last night, in which he did of course say he had committed a moral fault, although simultaneously refused to admit that there was any violence or coercion that night in the Sofitel. So he's sort of apologised for something he doesn't admit to having done. But Le Figaro, of course, doesn't say that. They say you would need to have a heart of stone to not be moved by Dominique Strauss-Kahn's plight after his political career collapsed in 14 minutes in a hotel room. They kind of omit to mention, of course, that it didn't quite collapse of its own accord.
A lot of the papers also talking about his suspicions of a plot.
Yes, let's look at Libération. Their headline says, they quote him saying, "A trap, it's possible." This is something he said last night. You might remember immediately after his arrest there were lots of suspicions in the press that it might be some kind of Sarkozyist right-wing plot. That was dismissed pretty quickly, but he did allude again to those suspicions last night in that interview. Libération's editorial is a little bit more balanced than the Figaro's. They say, while he did seem to be genuinely wrestling with his conscience at some minutes during last night's interview, he also seemed to be terribly pre-scripted, very rehearsed, and the fact that he got the sex problem out of the way quite quickly and then moved on to talking about the Euro crisis as if he was still a presidential candidate shows, they say, that he still hasn't quite realised the impact this might have had on his reputation, and they end the editorial saying that they're just keen to move on to another subject.
Yes, aren't we all? We're not going to, though, because I like this idea. L'Express, they got their journalists to give him marks out of 20.
Yes, and these are quite interesting just in the fact that they vary so wildly. Some of his journalists have given him 17 out of 20, saying they felt terribly sorry for the poor man, while others have gone for 8, saying that not only was it pre-rehearsed and acted, it was also badly acted, and he shouldn't consider a career change because he's a ham actor.
OK, and finally, really briefly, just got time to mention an article from Le Figaro from the health pages.
Yes, just to change the subject, Le Figaro have a psychiatrist in their paper today saying that the number of people who suffer from egocentricity and can't admit that they ever commit any mistakes in France is on the rise. They say moving from a more religious or Puritan society that France had maybe 100 years ago to a more individualist and consumerist one has created a rise in the number of people who just find it hard to deal with the concept of guilt and hard to admit that they've done any wrong.
Why aren't we surprised? I say nothing. Elena, thanks very much.
I'm saying nothing either.
Very sensible, Elena. Thanks a lot. It's Elena here with the French newspapers at this time every day on France 24.